Each of us is a unique person, so we carry different genes. That's to start. And in those genes, we carry traces of our ancestors, literally. So you can basically read portions of your genetic code that refer to your ancestors from the various lines that you have been composed of as a child. Genetic genealogy basically means using DNA testing in genealogical research to aid your traditional research, the traditional genealogical research, as we now call it, to make a contrast with genetic genealogical research. It can help you verify relationships you know about or you suppose that exist. You can find new relatives through these tools that it offers. And you can also get an idea about your ethnicity and your deep ancestry on particular lines that allow it. And you can also learn a little about your health, your predispositions. But that's like the second point is something that's not really clear. But the first point that I have on my slide is what is actually most interesting, and you can get a lot if you dive into genetic genealogy for your traditional research. Well, the traditional question to genealogists is how far back can you trace your ancestors? And people used to say like the 16th century, well, that's very far. And now I can say I know that my ancestors 20,000 years ago were the first to do horseback riding or who bred cattle in the Eastern Asian steppes. Well, that's something different, and it's getting, you cannot tell about particular persons, but you know more about where I am from. That's one of those basic questions for genealogists. I will give a very brief introduction now into genetics, into genetics in general, because that's the foundation for genetic genealogy. And I also started with this because it's deeply linked to my city of Brno in the Czech Republic. Gregor Mendel is considered the founder of genetics. He was a German-speaking monk in the Czech Republic, born not far from where I am now in Silesia, and he lived in Brno. He did experiments with peas, with planting them and exploring the color of the flower and the size of the product and so on. So this was when he founded his first laws of genetics in 1865 in Brno. Then a century after that in Cambridge in Britain, there was also a British and an American scientist, Crick and Watson, who discovered the structure of DNA, of what actually is behind those laws. And then the first forensic use of DNA, that means to use it in court to decide whether somebody has committed a crime or not, like serious business already based on DNA, was in 1986. That's when I was born, by the way. So 30 years ago, 32. And the first commercial genealogical tests became available around the year 2000. So it's been around for even not 20 years now. And by this year, 12 million people have already tested for genealogy. It's mostly people in the USA. So it's like one of my goals to try to make more people in the Czech Republic test and make genetic genealogy more known in our society and elsewhere in the world. Commercial DNA testing usually works like this. You choose a company, you order a test kit, they send you some little small tube that you use according to the instructions in a few minutes to scrape some cells from the inside of your inner cheek, or you spit into a small bottle and you send that back to the laboratory. You wait a few weeks or maybe a few months, depends on what test you have ordered, and then you get your results online and you can start interpreting them. It's the second part and the most exciting one, obviously, but it's not done. You start only. When you see your matches, you see your ethnicity is okay, and other ways, other results that it produces, and you have to interpret it and find answers to your questions. It's important to have some question. When you are taking a test, you may want to know, well, am I really Czech? Do I have Czech ancestors, or is it just a legend in the family? Or then you can ask, like, am I related to these people from Europe who I think, according to my research, are my relatives? So you can get tested you and them and compare if you are related and how far you are related if you don't know. Am I actually from this village? Well, you can find somebody of the same name in the village, convince them to get tested, and you can find out if you share common ancestors. So these are the various use cases you can have for DNA testing. It's good to have a question to start, but there will be more questions appearing, obviously. It makes you dependent anyway. And so there are 3 types of tests that you can take basically. The most common one is the bottom one in the center of the picture, autosomal test. It's based on autosomal chromosomes, which are the largest portion of DNA, and those chromosomes, the data that can be read from them comes from all your ancestors combined. I will tell about this later on next slides. But there is also the Y chromosome, which is some portion of DNA which is only inherited from father to son. So it represents your paternal line, your male-only line. So your father, grandfather, great-grandfather, only that line that is here on the pedigree on the very left. And the mitochondrial DNA is the opposite. It just follows the maternal line, just the mother and her mother and so on. But the maternal line has an advantage that also women inherit it from their mothers, but women don't pass it on, otherwise it would not work. So the Y chromosome is only present in men. I will start later with autosomal, but let us have an overview of the 3, and then I will talk more about Y chromosome testing, because I think it's something that's not known to many people, and it might help you find your relationships many centuries ago. Even if you have people in the Czech Republic who are not close relatives, you can still confirm relationships with them. And that's also what the research I'm working on is concentrated on. So Y chromosome testing follows the direct paternal line, and that's basically the line of surnames. Surnames have been out for a few hundreds of years, but Y DNA has a large potential of tracing your ancestors back many thousands of years, basically. You will not get the names again, but you can find out for 2 male how far back in the history are they related with each other through the paternal line. So if you take the lines of their fathers, how soon or how late you find a common ancestor on that particular line. So it's just one of those many lines you can see in the pedigree. But this one has been preserved in our genes almost with no change for many centuries and thousands of years. So it's the right mutation rate, because like 200,000 years ago, when they say first humans emerged in Africa, everyone had the same Y DNA, and as people started spreading across the globe, then it mutated, it changed a little every couple of generations. So we can tell differences, and still it's not the same one for everyone. That would not be of any use. So we can follow the differences between everyone's DNA, Y DNA, and see how far they are from each other. But the tests have a medium-sized price. It's not the most common kind of test, but in the Czech Republic, many people have got it free due to the research I'm participating in. Mitochondrial DNA is something that is not very useful. It has to be used to answer an exact question that could be answered by following the maternal line. It is quite the same information you can get from there. It doesn't change very quickly, so it's not the best type of DNA to look at for genealogy, but it still exists. So that you know. And the autosomal testing, that's what you usually mean when you speak about genetic DNA testing. In the commercials, most companies offer this product, this kind of test. It follows all lines combined. So that means that you can get a lot of relationships, cousins from any of your great-grandfathers can match you in the test. It can go up to 6 or 8 generations back, and you can prove it'll be 2, 3, 4 generations for sure. You may be lucky to get father matches, but not with everyone. But so it is good enough for Americans tracing their ancestors back in Europe, because those 6 to 8 generations basically mean 200 or 300 years back in history, and that's the time most of your ancestors came over from Europe or somewhere else to America. But it doesn't make much sense here in Europe, where our folks stayed in the same country for many centuries. So we only learn we are Czechs. Okay, we know that. But it's good for us to know still the relationships with other people, and we can concentrate more on Y DNA or some other lines that bring out, that bring to the light to more distant relationships, to more distant ancestors. Well, when you read this autosomal DNA material, the code, the information, it's composed of random segments. So there are segments. There is I will show stripes of DNA from one ancestor, and then another ancestor contributed another one. So you are a puzzle composed of tiles of pieces that come from various ancestors of yours. But because there are so many ancestors, when you go farther back into history, like it's starts with 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. So you can imagine if you are supposed to have a piece of everyone, then those pieces are getting smaller and smaller with each generation. So you cannot read those pieces clearly if they are very small. So that's why it's limited to like 1700s. The end of 1700s, 18th century is how far you can go back with this method. And then there are companies, providers of genetic testing. You cannot do it at home. Well, we have a lab in the Czech Republic that's running this non-commercial project. So it takes a long time, but it's for free. Yet with the advance of the commercial testing and so many people interested in it, mostly in the USA, people can buy those tests for a good price. And we here in Europe have maybe one company now working on this in Great Britain, but we are mostly dependent on those US testing companies. So taking a test here means ordering the test tube, the test kit from across the ocean and sending it back. So it incurs some extra charge for the mailing, and it also has to be paid in American dollars with American prices. It's also a limitation. This has to be done usually in English, where there are some translations into Czech, but most of these websites are only available in English again. So that's for you to imagine what the situation is here. For you, it's easier. If you live in America, the choice number one is definitely Ancestry.com. That is what many people imagine when you say genetic genealogy, I have heard. But it's not popular in the Czech Republic. Because it's subscription-based, it's English only, it doesn't have many records from, I think you had some presentation today on the program as well. So there's not many records on Czech people. MyHeritage would be more popular website for creating family trees in Europe, in the Czech Republic in particular. So that's now when more and more people are getting tested if they are from the Czech Republic, because they are being offered this possibility by their family tree building website. So this one is popular here. Well, you can still get tested with one company and transfer your results to another. Mostly, Ancestry.com does not allow such transfers. So they are wise. They know how to attract clients. But I'm not there, for instance. But I have tested with Family Tree DNA myself, which is a company that also offers Y-DNA testing. So you can send one sample and you can get tested for this autosomal thing, see your ethnicities and so on. But if you, at a later stage or right away, decide to get tested for Y-DNA, they are the only company that does this. Well, Living DNA also does something like that. I have it on my slide. But those are UK-based and they don't provide the same kind of results, but it's going into details. Anyway, Family Tree DNA has the largest Y-DNA database. Like Living DNA doesn't have a database. It's important to be in a database. Every company has their own database that consists of the results of their clients. So you can only compare to other people who have tested with the same company, unless you transfer, you copy your data, you upload it to the other companies' websites. They sometimes take some money for that, but it's not really expensive, and it's often for free. I think most of these companies now offer free imports of other companies' data if they support it at all. Ancestry does not this at all. 23andMe, to mention, is mostly focused on medical testing, so not many people are interested in genealogy there. I have heard again. Well, 23andMe and Ancestry are difficult for Czechs to access. It also has a higher price. You pay like $100 for testing and another $100 for having the courier send it by registered mail and so on. So people don't choose that, but you can choose one and then copy your results to different others. Or you can get tested with several ones if you don't believe it works. So you will get the same results from them, the basic results, not the interpretation, but I will speak about it. It's good to know that these companies have frequent sales. So if you are not forced by somebody who is very old and you still want to get them tested, it's good to test all people, the oldest one, to start with them. But if you are not in a rush, you can wait for the DNA Day in April or Black Friday or Christmas time when they run sales. The prices are lower again. And it's usually when I order 1 or 2 kits, if I have somebody in the family, or I suggest people do it then. The product is the same. And you don't have to rush then taking the sample. It's just to order the test kit by mail. Czech laboratories only offer overpriced Y and MT mitochondrial DNA tests. They cannot afford offering autosomal testing because it costs a lot of money, and it's only worth if you have many clients. If you don't have many clients, like in our small market, it's not worth running such a business. That's why we are dependent on US companies. And don't overestimate the ethnicity estimates that you get, because those are still alchemy. I would say, like, there are algorithms to guess from your DNA where your ancestors came from, whether they are Europeans, Asians, Africans. Well, maybe that's how it works, but I will later show an example that is not very useful for Czechs, because we are literally in the center of Europe, and also genetics shows that we are a mixture of each part of Europe. There's also, these companies often don't have a category for Central Europe, so they say we are a mixture of, it depends where you set up the borders, and everything starts from that. But you should download your raw data, that means the actual values they have read from your DNA, keep it in file, because then you are not dependent on that particular company anymore, and you can upload it to other companies' websites as well to find more people or more information on your DNA. And I suggest you actively seek contact with the other people, because many people are just waiting. Okay, I have seen my map, it's nice, but they will never contact the other people who are sure to be their relatives, either closer or farther in the list that they get, the list of matches. Now, yeah, this is something what we have already seen, but I repeat that you have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, and then it doubles if every generation you go back in history. And the autosomal DNA then is combined of all those ancestors. So you have a half of the DNA from your father, and the other half comes from your mother. But they also got their half and half from their parents. So you only have like 20%, 25% of DNA on average from your grandfather from mother's side, and 25% from the grandfather on the father's side. And then from the other 2 grandmothers, you also have 25% from each. So this means that the farther you go back into history, the less DNA you have in common. So it's getting more difficult to prove such relationships if the common ancestor is farther back in history. This is the result that my father got when I got him DNA tested for autosomal DNA. Well, it's something that's not really useful for us here. Well, he lives, and his family, all the way I know, back to the 18th century, they all, 17th century even, they lived in Moravia, in southern Moravia. So the algorithm says, well, he has like a third from East Europe, a third comes from West Europe, and the third comes from South Europe. So basically means Central Europe. That's what I knew. It is good. It's a confirmation for us that there was not an ancestor who would have come over from, I don't know, like far away. Asian ancestors, Jewish or so on. Nothing like that has been found. But we are perfect Central Europeans. But for Americans, this can already be used so that you have an idea whether you also have some Scandinavian roots mixed together with Czechs and so on. But what's more interesting, once you get your results from the autosomal test, is the matches. Those are the people who share some portion of DNA with you. And my father has, as his first match, his own daughter, my sister, Marek Blahuš. And the algorithm, because of the amount of shared DNA, even guessed correctly that it's either his daughter or his mother, because you share half of your DNA with your mother, and your daughter shares your half from you and the half from her mother. So it cannot basically tell the difference between the mother and the daughter. Well, but it's just the game of numbers. But I know it's his daughter. So I named her his daughter. It's the column on the right. That's what I actually told the computer it is. But in the middle column, somewhere in the center, you can see its guesses based on the number of shared centimorgans and the longest block, the length of the longest segment. Those are numbers in some unit that you don't have to understand, the centimorgan, but 3,500 more or less means a full set of chromosomes, because their chromosomes come in pairs. So there's one pair of chromosomes from Jana's father, that's my father whose profile you see here, and she has another 3,500 from her mother. And as the number goes lower, then it means that the DNA is not only from my father's side, but also there are other people who have contributed to this person's DNA. The second person in the list, Libor Kratochvíl, is my father's first cousin, and he only shares almost 1,000 centimorgans. So that means about a third or fourth of DNA. I know it comes from the paternal side, so I told it to the program, and you see the blue icon. And because as I tell it from which side, which DNA comes from, which match, then it can also help me guess for other people whom I do not know, whether they are related from my father's father or my father's mother. But I need to start taking tests also for my father's relatives, close relatives. It's good when you start with your parents or grandparents or yourself, depending who is alive, and then also start testing close cousins, because they can tell you the difference. You cannot tell, just based on the data for my father, from which ancestors he got which portions of his DNA. But once I test his cousin, like Libor here, I know this cousin comes from my father's paternal side. And if they share some portion of DNA, it has to be DNA that's been contributed to my father, from his paternal side. It cannot be the DNA of my father's mother. Otherwise, my father's paternal cousin would not have such DNA. So it can also, it's useful, very useful to see the portions shared by the two people. Well, and there are more people on the list. Those at the beginning, let me come back, are Czech names. Those are mostly people whom I have tested, but there was also now he's a friend, but I didn't know him before. I actually made this connection because of genetic genealogy, but he lives in Prague, and he's tested his wife and some of the family of his wife, and they actually come from my region, and they happen to be, his mother-in-law happens to be my father's third cousin. I didn't know these people before. But as I found a match, I sent him an email, like the website gives you a way to contact the other person, and we exchanged our pedigrees and quickly found out there is one Kovařík family name which we have in common. And we connected our family trees, and now I have new family, even here in the Czech Republic. But most of these people on the list are people who are not Czechs. There are not many Czechs who have tested so far. They are mostly Americans. That's what we got today. So it's quite common for a beginning genetic genealogist here that they make a link with American Czechs. Well, that's good for you, because Americans are mostly represented in these databases these days. And also some of them have Slavic sounding names like Kosovsky or the Wieczorek, like the last two there, those are Czechs again. But I can guess by the name, but the name doesn't say much because that's just the paternal line. But those people, all of them have their own 64, 128 ancestors and so on in each generation. Some of them have posted family trees online, but I can contact the others. I can use the estimate of the relationship as a start, but I can also see how they match which segments. Like, let me show this example again with my father's cousin. So you see my father Bohumil on the bottom, Bohumil Blahuš, and Libor Kratochvíl, his first cousin, his paternal cousin. If I enter the data from this matching website of the company I have tested with into DNA Painter, which is a free website where you can combine the results of various tests and actually map the pieces of your chromosomes to actual ancestors. Then if I tell him these are the marked in brown, that comes from the application, it has found that these segments, these parts of the chromosomes, are shared by my father and his paternal cousin Libor Kratochvíl. Then I know that if they both have the same pieces of DNA, that those exact pieces have to be inherited from their closest common ancestor. And that was František Blahuš and Antonína Kovařík, this couple, my father's paternal grandparents, and Libor Kratochvíl's maternal grandparents. They are those that they share. It cannot be my from my father's maternal side, and it cannot be from his paternal side at all, because that would be coincidence. They are not supposed to share DNA of people who are not their common ancestors. But I know they have a common couple of ancestors, and it has to be their DNA was marked here in brown. So it's like the stripes. Each line is one chromosome. They are numbered on the left. And if you test more people, like I now tested also Marie Večerková, who is a second cousin to my father, so she is one generation farther back related to my father through my father's great-grandfather, then I show her shared segments, the segments she shared with my father, in blue. So the first thing to watch is that they are fewer, because she is a father-related person. She's a second cousin, not a first one. Then she obviously shares less DNA with my father than his first cousin. And if I zoom in on chromosome number 3, I can even see here that some of those shared segments in chromosome 3 are common to all the 3 people, to Libor, to Marie, and to my father. So that means that first I thought that this segment you see in brown on the right, on the first chromosome, that it's only comes for sure from my father's grandparents. But because it's also shared by my father's second cousin, I can tell this part of DNA has to come already from my father's great-grandparents. So if I test more distant relatives, I can learn about more ancient history of the individual pieces of DNA. If the people share them with my father, they have to come all the way down from a common ancestor to both these people who are tested. But if you go farther back in history, you are getting smaller and smaller segments and lower number of them, and it actually disappears and vanishes. You cannot really tell the difference from noise when you go back 6 to 8 generations. There is a table. There is a table with results, observations from many tests that people have taken, and if they knew the relationships, they submitted it into a database. And now you have the numbers in the table. You see that the parent has those 3,500 centimorgans in common with a child. The grandparent only on average. It can be different for each situation. They have 1,700 in common. And then if you look at the cousins, that's the 1C on the right of self, the 1C first cousin has 874 on average, and the second cousin like 200. And with third cousins, the interval can only show that you can have nothing in common. You can have no distinguishable DNA, autosomal DNA in common with your third cousin, but you still have a good chance of having something. So if I went further and tested my father's distant relatives, I would see how far it goes until I cannot tell any relationship anymore. But I have successfully tested for a very short segment with my father's fifth cousin. So it's working. He's living in the USA, and that's actually the family who brought me to genealogy. That's the Blahuš family in the USA. Thanks to them. Well, now I should speak a little about, in more detail, on the sex chromosomes. Those are not the autosomal anymore, so that's not the pattern you have seen so far, that something inherited from all your ancestors combined, but these chromosomes come only from one side of the family. One part of the DNA, the X chromosome, is from the mother, and there is another X chromosome from the father if the child is going to be a daughter. But if the father decides, well, he doesn't decide, but it's the sperm, whether it's a Y chromosome bearing sperm cell, then it creates a son. So every one of us has a pair of these sex chromosomes, and if there is one Y chromosome among them, you are a man. So the Y chromosome is basically saying, this is a man. It doesn't carry much useful information for your life, for the formation of your body, but it carries more or less random, that's as far as science knows today, more or less random information that are inherited from your father's fathers. And they rarely change. This information, sometimes it's changed by accidents, but you can calculate how far this information changes, but it's more or less unchanged when it is passed from the father to the son, only to the son. The girls cannot have it because they are girls, they don't have a Y chromosome at all. So that's also when women would like to test for this, they have to ask their father, their brother, or their husband if they want to have him tested. And the test for Y DNA tests then the line, it explores the line of the same surname, basically, if there was not a change in surname or illegitimate child. But this tool is also great for trying to discover the origin of the illegitimate child. I will speak about it very soon. So this is the paternal line that we are following in Y DNA testing. And we actually measure the Y chromosome by looking at repetitions of nucleobases. Those are basically like letters of the alphabet that form the DNA. A, C, G, and T. They have their Latin numbers, the names of the particular substances they represent in the DNA, but that's not really important. Those are just letters for you, which are repeated. As you see on the bottom left, you can have in your Y DNA code GATA, 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 repeated 8 times, 9 times, 10 times on the same place. Everyone has different number of repeats. This is called short tandem repeats. And if this was one of the first methods of measuring DNA of genetic genealogy, when they counted how many times those sequences of letters appear in a particular place. And then the number of repetitions, the number of repeats, forms the result. And you can compare that. I will show you, this is the Y DNA certificate of my 5th cousin in the USA. And the values in black and white, those like set next to his, he has more, he has the red ones. The values in black are mine in the same test. I don't know if you can clearly read it, but it's not really important. The important thing is that those numbers are the same in most of the tested locations with the exception of one. So in some place which is called DYS439, doesn't matter what it means, but that's the same place in Y-DNA where he has 13 repetitions of some sequence and I have 14. So there was a small change somewhere, I don't know where exactly, on the way from our common ancestor. Our common ancestor, the Blahuš ancestor, was born in 1782. So I can for sure, like for this small distance, it means it's not a close relation, but I can for sure tell he comes from our Blahuš line and I come from his, basically. That the genealogical information we have found in the archives, in the parish books, the way we have connected us through the written records is confirmed by genetics. So it means that also that all of my father's fathers and his father's fathers, at least up to the common ancestor, all of them were the sons of their fathers. There are no illegitimate child, no changes in surnames and so on. And I can prove this through the Y-DNA testing. This is a family tree which shows it clearly on the top, our common ancestor. And if you go down the generations, but you have to follow the male lines only. Once you reach a woman, it breaks because the connection is not there anymore. She doesn't take the Y chromosome of her father. So this works great if you are researching a surname line. You can find unknown fathers through that. If you are happy, if you're lucky, sorry, I can show that later on another slide, I guess. But you can count some distance like this. The distance of 1 in my case meant that we are quite close. But then, according to the number of markers that match, 25 of 25, if you have all the numbers same, you are sure to have like this percentage how sure you can be that you share the same ancestor. So based on the result and the comparison, you can tell that you are closely related and how many generations probably far back is your common ancestor. Y-DNA haplogroups are a generalization of these results. So you put together the people who have similar results, basically. Well, and then scientists were able to discover the patterns in human migration thousands and thousands of years ago just by exploring how close or how far away from each other are people living in various places. And comparing it to ancient DNA, because you can also extract the Y-DNA information from burial sites, from Middle Ages, from ancient times, when you find bodily remains, and you are lucky to find them quite uncorrupt. That this information is provided, although it's difficult to extract. It's not a commercial test, but the scientists are able to get the same kind of information for you and for a corpse that had been buried for centuries. And the scientists have found out that, according to today's theories, all mankind comes from Africa, and there are lines that show how those male lines spread across the world in those thousands of years in the past. You can see, for instance, that the Native Americans are supposed to have come to America through the Bering Sea when it was frozen, and then they went all the way down south to Southern America. So Southern America is not thought to be settled from Polynesia, from Australia, as it was thought before. That's just by following the distances, the differences in people's Y chromosome results. And there are various haplogroups, like those general groups, like large groups of people based on their paternal ancestors. And the most common ones in Europe are the R group, R1A, that's like a Slavic group. It covers today, it's mostly found in Eastern Europe. And R1B is the haplogroup, Y haplogroup, mostly found in Western Europe. In the Czech Republic, as you can see here, it's even not clear which one is more. We are in the crossroads of Europe, and we have people of these Eastern groups and the Western group, obviously also different other ones, but these two form 60–70% of what you can find in the Czech Republic today. Well, this is exact chart showing 34% of the Slavic haplogroup, Slavic people, as I say, is a simplification, okay, because like genetics does not take into account the culture, the language, so many things to compare, but it is mostly found in Slavic countries today. And R1B, 28%. Then there are also other groups like the Scandinavian and some Jewish and so on, but it's like simplification to tell where they come from, but it's a good first criterion to tell whether you are or you're not related to someone, and then you inspect the individual markers. The haplogroup R1A then is said to be formed in about 20,000 years ago in Central Asia. They were the first people to domesticate the horse, and then later from southern Siberia they went to stay in the Pontic-Caspian steppe. That's somewhere between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, so quite far Eastern Europe or already Asia. And that's when they came from later to settle Central Europe. The largest expansion of these people into Central Europe, or the last one, was around the year 600 AD. That coincides with the Slavic expansion. So the history of the Slavic people, who also are supposed to have come from Eastern Europe, from the area where now Poland, Ukraine, and so on is located. So this might be actually genetic footprint of the Slavs in our paternal lines. Those people were speaking an old Indo-European language, the history of languages as well, and there is some culture which is related, that usually they find this group when they discovered some archaeological site from particular culture. And you see that the Eastern R1A group is mostly in Eastern Europe these days. R1B is nicknamed the Celtic Germany group. It cannot really be taught from one another, Celts and Germans, or the Germanic tribes. This is the group that I belong to, for instance. So we are not really a Germanic nation. We don't know that. We've been living here in the Czech Republic, the family, for 500 years. But somehow in the past, our ancestors were earlier than the other group to leave that region in Asia and come to Europe. And that's why they are now farther west, because the new group coming later, the R1A, pushed them farther to the west. So that's basically west-east division in Europe. Those people are, again, based on the archaeological findings, said to have used bronze weapons for a very long time, and they also were skillful in horseback riding. And they were again found in some, even in the Czech Republic, there were old, very old, thousands of years old graves where remnants of people of this haplogroup were found. So that's the western part. And now an example how to use this Y-DNA testing in actual genealogical research. My colleague Martin Kotačka comes from a family whose name is not really frequent, the Kotačka family, and their origin is in the same ancestral village as mine. That's also, we are seventh cousins to each other, and we are interested in the same region. That's on the southeast of the Czech Republic of Moravia. So you see 1656 is the earliest mention of his surname, his ancestors in our ancestor village. But there is another Kotačka family that is still living these days in Western Moravia, in the center of the Czech Republic, more or less. And they also trace their oldest ancestors back to 1656. It was a list of people living in Moravia. So basically, you cannot tell whether they are related or not. A genealogist would say, well, I cannot tell. We may be related, but we may not. But using genetic genealogy, he was actually able to find that their genetic distance, if you follow the Y chromosome, is only 3 or 4 markers in the test that I showed in the certificate. So it's very probable that they are related to each other, and you could even guess how long ago before 1656 the common ancestor lived. And this enabled him to create a theory that the ancestor had to leave Eastern Moravia because of religious or reasons or wars. There is a particular explanation he has found out. He cannot prove that, but he is quite sure now that these two families are actually linked to each other. On the other hand, I found several other Blahuš families in the Czech Republic who are not related to me, at least within the last few thousands of years, and that's all I need. Everyone is related to everyone eventually, but you would need to go thousands of years back in history. You can see them. There is like a tree created by a program of many other people, and the green dots are the Kotačka samples. So they are clearly much more closer to each other than to other people who got tested. An example, person whose family name is Reitinger clearly doesn't belong to other Moravians, because on the chart that's here, he is very, very far, so much more distant to other Czech Moravian people who tested than they are to each other. And it's sure that he knows that his great-grandfather came from Germany. So he had different Y DNA, which does not fit in well among the Moravian. So you can even tell that somebody is not from here. Just somebody's paternal line, again, let me not simplify it. The paternal line, the surname doesn't come from Reitinger, is a German word, by the way. What we did in our research was to focus on southeastern Moravia. We are interested in the whole of Moravia and maybe even Bohemia. But southeastern Moravia, there is a region called Campus Lucko in the old chronicles from the 13th century, when the Czech lands were still not united. And there we discovered that there is a higher portion of R1A group than R1B, and it might mean that there was a closer relationship to Slovakia and to Eastern Europe than actually to west of here, which is behind the other side of River Morava. So it means that there was a particular history of this region, and we are trying to explore it by collecting samples from people who have origins here, where also we do. Well, I will have to speak a little. I have to skip a few slides, but I will want to show some examples of how Y DNA, the paternal line, but in general you can make similar use cases for autosomal testing as well, how it can be used in practice. So I will skip these Wallachians, but Wallachians have been detected not to be of Romanian origin, because they are basically Czechs speaking some words from Romanian dialects. You can tell just based on the haplogroup that somebody might have had Jewish heritage on the paternal side, and this is an example of the family Křižka. Křižka is their surname, and the word Kříž means cross. So it might have been a Jew who was Christianized later and accepted the surname Crossman. And his ancestors, his haplogroup, is today found mostly in like regions like Israel and Arabic countries. That's where the Jews originate from. He does not have many people related to him here in Central Europe. Often you can come across Pater Ignotus, that's Latin for father unknown. And if you run into that in a church book, you are out of luck, because you cannot continue your research. You don't have a father to find. You have a white spot, like on this recorded I show here. Mr. Sassman had a great-great-grandfather born in 1842, and he was an illegitimate child. But he was successful in finding a match to his own Y-DNA that was passed to him from this ancestor, and he found a match in England. That was some Mr. Willard, spelled with W-I-L-L-A-R-D. And then he realized there was a soldier called Willard, a little different spelling, in the list of inhabitants of this village where his ancestors lived at the same time. And he concluded that this soldier, who was foreign, who did not stay at the village for a long time, had to be the father of his ancestor. Because of this relationship, the same surname, very close match to this England person living today, the soldier probably was of British or West European origin, and he is thought to be the unknown father of his ancestors. So shame on you, Mr. Willard, because he had at the time his own family, a wife, his own children, but somehow he managed to become the father, the great-great-great-grandfather of Mr. Sassman eventually. That's something that's not completely sure 100%, but it's a very good hypothesis. But there are also people like Kunovsky, is somebody coming from the village of Kunovice, but that means the original surname was lost when they named him after a village he came from. But there is somebody who is very close to him in the test, and he did not move, so we know the original surname, and we can guess what the original surname was before it was changed, because somebody else kept the original surname and has a match on the Y-DNA line. You can make genetic bridges across the ocean with Czech Americans and Czechs. Czechs usually find Czech Americans in their matches because those people have tested mostly, so it's good for you that when somebody tests, they can find they are related to you and they can send you a message and you can explore your trees. Autosomal DNA can confirm that you have Czech origins by looking on the map and seeing if the people you match are Czech people mostly. It can help you verify close relatives. So if you have somebody here in Europe who you think are relatives, but you are not sure, you can get them and you test it and see if you match each other. And Y-DNA is good if you have people of the same surname and you have no idea whether they are related or not, but you would like to see if this family is related to you. You may even not know where your ancestors came from, but if you contact somebody of the same surname and you and they got tested on the Y chromosome, so it has to be two men, then you can tell whether you are from the same family of the surname or not. So Červenka, friend of mine, managed to discover another Červenka relative in the US just by making a comparison of the Y STR results. Great Moravia. Great Moravia was an empire in Czech Republic, basically, and Slovakia and Hungary as well. And it disappeared in history 1,000 years ago, 907 AD. And nobody knew where these people disappeared. They could not disappear, but somehow they maybe mixed with other people who came, or they then lived to see the other kingdoms and empires and republics to come. And the Moravian Museum has been running research that I closely follow, where they analyzed bodily remains of people 1,000 years ago buried in some ancient site in an old church from the Great Moravian time. And they managed to extract some Y-DNA data, because like autosomals would be for nothing. Those people lived so far ago that nobody has kept the same segments today. But the Y-DNA has passed almost unchanged to some people who still live in our region. It has been proved by their research. It was not a 13, but it was 13 people matched. There were like 300 or 400 people who tested from the region, and 13 of them were found to have paternal relatives buried in this old church, which doesn't stay anymore, but which was discovered by archaeologists 60 years ago. So that's something you can link yourself to people who lived here 1,000 years ago, and you can know where their grave is. Well, this is another case of a noble family who might have died out, but because of the surname, it is supposed that they still may have some living relatives, and the city is going to take a small specimen of the corpse and to try to match that to living people. But genetic genealogy is a patience science. You have to wait a lot often. There was this soldier called Chalovsky, and the church book only says he was a soldier from the illustrious regiment of Paderborn, so somewhere in Germany was based, but there is nobody who of the surname, almost nobody. It's one small family, as you can see on the map, in the Czech Republic, and there is a family legend. They came from abroad. So my colleague, whose family this is now waiting for someone else, maybe in Germany or maybe in the US or in the Czech Republic, to test for the Y DNA and see if they match each other. Otherwise, you cannot tell where those people come from. But once somebody from Germany signs up and say, hey, I met you, then he can follow his own ancestry and maybe connect this soldier to someone in Germany. Well, can it be abused is a question frequently asked by people, particularly here in the Czech Republic, but I think it applies to everyone. Maybe everyone has a different reason to have fear of genetic testing. DNA is personal data protected by law. These data protection laws have recently been strengthened, so it's very strict today in Europe what you can or what you cannot publish. But if you have the agreement, the consent of the people, it's okay. So the databases take care of your data. And by the way, why DNA is more safe to handle than autosomes, because Y-DNA does not carry any health-related information, and it's also shared by males in the whole family because it doesn't change that much. It's difficult to tell an exact person, but it's easy to tell an exact family by looking at Y-DNA. The autosomes DNA is unique, really unique for everyone. Czech people usually fear that the police could abuse their results, because they think they might be confused for some criminal and convicted for some crime. But we always calm them down, saying that DNA only acts as a secondary evidence in the police, in the court. They have to have some other reason of thinking that you have committed a crime, not just because your DNA was found laying somewhere near the crime scene. You could have just incidentally passed there, so you could not be jailed just for your DNA. So it's safe from this point of view. I have heard that Americans are more concerned with insurance and health issues, but there again there is a law that tries to prohibit the misuse of DNA information for insurance. But that's not the case here in the Czech Republic because our insurance system works a different way. I would like to suggest a few web resources for you because I don't have that much time to talk today. On the other hand, next year, I'm going to have a series of presentations, one about autosomal DNA in detail, one about the Y-DNA, and I will talk more about that. But if you don't want to wait that year, and you should not, you can join the Facebook groups that Kate has already mentioned. There is a Czech one, Genealogy, but we speak Czech there. You can also join, and that's what I recommend, the English-speaking group Czech Genealogy DNA. And if you find it and get accepted, which is like automatic or almost, then there are already a few hundreds of people in each of these groups talking their own results, and you can also learn a lot. And those people are really friendly, trying to help each other. They are experts, but also beginners, so don't be afraid. If you want to learn more about DNA and genetic testing, then I recommend the website DNA Explained. Well, you are getting to get a handout. I will send one to the organizers with these addresses. DNA Explained is a very good blog made by a single woman who blogs a lot, and it's for everything for free. You can read about various issues related to genetic genealogy and the development of this science. For autosomal DNA in particular, that means if you have already tested with one of those common testing like Ancestry or 23andMe, you can upload your results to GetMatch. You can download them, the raw data. There is a way of doing that, and GetMatch is a website which is independent on any company, and the basic use is for free, and they have a large database as well where anyone from any company can upload their data and share it. So you can search for matches in this common database, and there are other people you cannot match in your company's database. And that's worth doing. And you can also inspect the matches in more detail than the companies let you. DNA Painter is a website where you can do those nice charts to see which ancestor does which part of your DNA come from. So it's good to get oriented, not to get lost in all those matches. For Y-DNA, I recommend the eupedia.com, which is a website which has descriptions of all those haplogroups and also basic introduction into genetic genealogy there. And genebase.cz is a Czech website. It also has some English translation where we collect the Y-DNA results. We have more than 2,000 people tested in a project, and there are also some other people. And if you happen to have been tested for Y-DNA, or if you take a test with family tree DNA, who are the only ones to do that, you can then upload your STR markers there. If you don't know the website for surname, not really lookups, but to get an idea where some surnames are present in the Czech Republic today, there are several websites. One of them is this Kde jsme, it means where we are, where a particular surname in the Czech Republic is present these days. You cannot find contact information, but you can get an idea whether the surname is common or on which regions it is mostly situated. And you can also discuss the frequently asked questions section of your testing company. Each of these companies on its website has clarification. Some companies have more than others now. Now, let me present briefly this project that I've been contributing to. There's the Genetics and Surnames project. It's an ongoing research of Czech Y-DNA. The paternal line has been out for more than 10 years. It's run by a research institute in Prague, and it tries to observe the relationship between surnames and DNA because of the Y chromosome closely linked to surnames. They can do 23 marker Y STR tests and get an estimate of the haplogroup, and they offer this to people from the Czech Republic who can prove their ancestry in the Czech Republic before year 1900. So basically people who have old Czech ancestry on the male line. And there have been more than 2,000 people in this research, and it's a free test. I can even arrange for some of you, if you were interested in taking part in this, to get tested for free in this Prague Institute, although it's a little difficult in logistically. But there is now somebody in the States who have received some test kits, like 20 test kits, and they can distribute it to other people, so I don't have to see each of them overseas. And if you would like to avoid buying such a test from family tree DNA, where you can get such a one and even a better one, and it's faster and so on, but if you don't want to do that, but would still like to research your paternal Czech line, with us it's possible. But it has to mean that you have yourself or somebody else in the family who is a man and whose surname is Czech, basically, or whose father's father was of Czech origin, because we are only researching Y-DNA that has been inherited from people who lived in today's Czech Republic. It can be German-speaking, but the region should be in the Czech Republic. So if you have a Czech surname, it's probably that your paternal ancestors came from there. You can qualify. If you are interested, you can send me an email and we will see how to do that. But you can also take a test with family tree DNA and then let me know, and I can help you enter your results into our database. And then you can match those 2,000 Czechs, but just with YSTR, not autosomes. That's our specialty in our database. So thank you for your attention. It was great talking to you. And if we have still some time, I can answer your questions, but you can also contact me at this address, CGSI, that was I specially created for this purpose, so that I know it's from here. It's blahuš.cz. That's my website. You can see on the slide now. It's my email address. So if you have any questions, I hope I will be able to hear you, and if I can hear them in some way, I'm happy to answer now or later next year. If you can prepare your questions, I will be lucky. I hope it will be good that I can also reply them there in person, whatever.